Hey, what is up, everybody? Episode 4 of Music Mysteries. We are the week after the Super Bowl. Philly cheesesteaks had a close one against the New England clam chowders. Great game. If you missed it, it was a good one. Philly cheesesteaks beat up on the New England Tom Brady's. Anyways, today we're talking about Charles Manson and the Beach Boys connection. Now, what is interesting about the Beach Boys is that they're a huge name. Everybody knows the Beach Boys. Wouldn't it be nice? Yeah, it would be if everybody knew this stuff. This is some crazy music industry information. If you guys don't know about this, we're talking today about Charles Manson. Like everybody knows the Manson family. Everybody knows that he is the brains behind all these crazy murders and a celebrity murder as well in Hollywood and LA. But today we're going to concentrate on what he was doing before the Manson family, before all the crazy stuff went down that made him actually famous instead of his music stuff. And before he was starting his cult family, the Manson family, he was a musician. He was trying to be a famous songwriter. He was trying to be a Bobby Dylan. He was trying to be a Beach Boys. He was trying to be a Paul McCartney, if you may. So we're going to go into one of these articles real quick. This is from businessinsider.com. And they have a little bit of bullet points here and just talking about the article. One of the bullet points talks about that Manson and his family cult formed a strange and brief relationship with the Beach Boys drummer Dennis Wilson during the summer of '68. So we're pre-'70s, we're in the flower power era, we're in the Woodstock era, and what's interesting to me is that the Beach Boys seem like the clean-cut version of the Beatles, and they seem like the American version of the Beatles. And what is interesting too about the personalities, in my opinion, of the Beach Boys is that they're all good Orange County or Los Angeles good old boys, and all they want to do is go surf and go to the beach and hang out with everybody. But if you dig a little deeper, it gets a little darker, and that's what seems to happen with a lot of these topics that I'm bringing up on the podcast. And so it also says here that the Manson family, which was the Charles Manson's cult, moved into Wilson's home that summer, where they all dropped acid and participated in group sex. So that goes along the lines of the flower power, the era of love, and all these pre-1970-esque sessions, and all the musicians and artists coming together and culminating this community. And it's interesting that not a lot of people know the connection between Manson family and the Beach Boys, and we'll try to dig a little deeper within the article and within some more articles that I have here. And the Beach Boys even ended up recording a version of one of Manson's songs. So that's also crazy fact that not only did they hang out with him, have some jams with him, maybe even recorded some legit productions with him, that once the Manson family became famous for all the murders and moving on to a celebrity murder, that it's interesting that someone like a band like the Beach Boys took a song from him, and everybody remembers Manson as this crazy, whacked out cult leader, even though maybe he had a hit or two in him when it comes to his songwriting. So crazy little tidbits there. I do want to say real quick that this has nothing to do with glorifying what Manson and the Manson family were doing in that age, but it is interesting that a lot of people do not know that Manson was a musician, that Manson was a songwriter, and that the Beach Boys might have taken a song or two from his playbook, from his songbook. That's interesting too. And obviously another bullet point is that years later, him and his cult would commit all these crazy murders, right in Pig, right in Helter Skelter. We all know that story. The reason I'm here, the reason I'm telling this is not a lot of people know about the musician Manson or the songwriter Manson and his connection with the music industry. So looks like here the Manson-Wilson relationship came to an abrupt end as the summer of '68 came to a close. When Wilson took Manson, an aspiring musician, to record at his studio, Manson had a disagreement with Wilson's producers and ended up pulling a knife on them. So that could be the end point of his professionalism when it comes to the Beach Boys. Possibly that was the thing that took him over the edge when it came to having a great connection with a great success in the industry with a successful artist and a successful band. This might have been the starting point of his ending of music stuff and the start of his violent stuff. You can definitely see how that may have coincided when you're songwriting, when you're doing the music stuff, when you're doing any sort of art or any art form, expressiveness, there's going to be emotion. And maybe Manson had many emotions at the same time, which coincided with his seriousness, coincided with him being a little crazy, and I'm sure substances and the drugs that they were taking at the time, I'm sure led to him going a little schizo. And what ended up happening is he goes in with I believe Dennis Wilson, the drummer. They were going to cut some stuff with the producers, and disagreements happen. He pulled out the shank. So you can definitely see where the Beach Boys as a whole band and Dennis Wilson may have seen him as a flight risk, may have seen him as a liability for their band and also for the music industry, because it seems to me that when it comes to a lot of bands, whether it was in the 60s or now, it's probably a very close-knit community where if you do one thing, everybody's going to know about it. If Rihanna pulls a knife on her producer in the studio when she wants to sing another lyric instead of the real lyric, people would hear about that, I'm sure, unless there was some kind of funnel down with the stories. But nonetheless, with Manson, that may have been the breaking point when it came to his industry likeness and maybe his credibility as a musician in the industry, at least. The family subsequently moved out of Wilson's house, but according to Lake, who is Diane Lake, let's see who Diane Lake is real quick. Diane Lake, who was that? She is Oh, she was the youngest cult follower. Interesting. So Diane Lake was the youngest, it looks like, of the Manson family cult. I want to bounce out of that because that's not our main topic. But she was in this article claiming that Manson and Wilson would occasionally still see each other in the year before Manson was arrested for all the murders. So even after the knife pulling, there may have been some sort of coincidence, coincidence. There could have been still meetings, there could have been still production stuff, there could have been songwriting, that who knows, maybe Dennis Wilson pulled some ideas, recorded them, went in the studio with Manson in a secret location, who knows. But it definitely does say here, in September of '68, they did record an altered version of his song, of Manson's song, Cease to Exist, which they renamed Never Learn Not to Love. And Wilson, I believe Dennis Wilson, was the sole songwriting credit. So, we don't know for sure. what happened when it came to how that worked out, when it came to how did they write that track with Manson. Was he accepting the fact that he was going to give it to the Beach Boys? Did he maybe tell Dennis Wilson, or did Dennis Wilson tell him, hey, this would work out better as a Beach Boys song if you release it as Charlie Manson or the Manson Gang band, that it wouldn't work out? Maybe there was a deal. Maybe he actually did just steal the song idea. Who knows? There's sticky things always going on with the industry, and always going on with songwriting credits, and going on with who gets rights and who really wrote the song. You look at just a year or two ago, there was a band that toured with Zeppelin, and yes, the intro riff to Stairway to Heaven was very reminiscent of this one song riff that a gentleman and his band wrote around the same time while they were touring with Zeppelin. But you gotta strike when the iron's hot. Yes, that is not appropriate if they really did steal a riff. But if that really happened back then, why didn't you press it back then? That's my question to the people of that band that were touring with Zeppelin in that time, because then it would make more sense. I don't like that 30, 40 years later, you're trying to sue somebody for something when the sales are already gone, the records are already out. What's going on? That's crazy to me. That's crazy. So, then you look at the end of the article where it looks like Dennis Wilson pretty much denies. He doesn't deny, but he pretty much squashes his role with Manson, and chilling with Manson, and writing with Manson, and partying with Manson. It says here on his quote, "As long as I live, I'll never talk about that." And Dennis Wilson told Rolling Stone in 1976 about that with the Manson family. And he ended up dying in 1983. He drowned in Marina del Rey, California. So it's interesting that he never talked, at least publicly, about his relations, in quotes, about his connections to Manson and the Manson family. Mainly because I'm sure he was very discouraged about what happened and what he did as being the leader of that cult. I know if I was jamming with somebody and had these ideas that he was a little hot-headed and maybe something happened later, and I wouldn't want to talk about it here. I think it was a very dark issue for Wilson, and for probably a lot of the Beach Boys members, if not all of them. I think that's a very dark cloud surrounding the Beach Boys with that era, and knowing Manson, and very credible sources relating the Beach Boys with Manson. And I think it's just crazy that there are some people that roll on the Beach Boys records and throw on their vinyl or throw on the albums and have no idea that at least their drummer was chilling with Charles Manson for a good bit. So let's go a little deeper here. Got another picture of Manson here. I did want to go to this Black Flag poster. So we have a Black Flag punk band. Notable member would be Henry Rollins. He does a lot of stuff now, other than music. But if you know Henry Rollins, he was one of the front men of Black Flag. And you have a poster here where you got Manson, and I wonder if this could also be maybe a follower of his, a lady here on the poster. And it looks like it was at the Whiskey, most likely Whiskey A Go-Go in Hollywood, but not sure. It just says Whiskey. Could be a totally different thing, but it would make sense because it would be Hollywood, and that's where Manson and the Beach Boys chilled out. So you have Black Flag, you have DOA on the on the poster here in the article, and it says from Canada. And not sure exactly what year it was, but it says at the Whiskey, Wednesday, October 8th. And then it says Creepy Crawl the Whiskey. And that is cool. Posters are cool. These show posters really tell a lot when it comes to what these bands wanted to show up with. And yeah, Black Flag being a punk band, they want to make everybody shocked. They want the shock factor with those type of acts. And little quote on the poster says, "Charlie, you better be good. It wasn't easy getting in here, you know." And that's the reason I brought up this poster, is that I wonder if that's a sighting maybe from the Beach Boys, maybe from Dennis Wilson, because they were the connection, the industry connection. They were the face of a lot of good music at the time. And you wonder how many strings they had to pull for Charlie Manson, or how many times they had to cover for Manson in the studio, pulling a knife, whether they tried to book him a show or two somewhere. You never know if they pulled a lot of strings for Manson, and once he started to go a little cuckoo, that maybe they started to really wear that. The guys in the Beach Boys started to really feel a lot of issues when it comes to industry pressure, comes to their resume, and it comes to their backgrounds as a band, as the Beach Boys. I think that's a cool little poster. It coincides with the subject. It coincides with the shock factor, and yeah, this is adding up to be very interesting with the connections. Let's see if there's anything on this article. Anything else that's a little shocking? Because I know next week we're going to go more in depth with specifically his ties with the music industry, the reason he hit the Tate House, which may or may not have been his reasoning. So we'll go into that next week. I'm going to try to make this a little shorter when it comes to the storyline of this, because this definitely isn't the biggest part of the Manson story when it comes to his music and when it comes to the industry. And it's not his most well-known stuff when it comes to Beach Boys connection, when it comes to Dennis Wilson. It's definitely not his biggest shock factor for being related to the music industry. And who knows, there's probably a lot of people that want to squash Charles Manson as a friend of the Beach Boys, or as a acquaintance of the Beach Boys. I'm sure there were plenty of producers that ran into Charles Manson around the years that he was trying to write and trying to work in the industry. And I'm sure he got blacklisted very quickly after he pulled that knife on whoever it was. I would be interested to see if they have sightings of the producers who worked with him. Very, very interesting stuff. Whoa. Okay. So I did find something. Oh, yeah. Okay. So we have Terry Melcher, I believe it is pronounced. Terry Paul Melcher. He was an American musician and record producer. He was instrumental in shaping the 1960s California and folk rock movements. So you can see why he was very open to working with any musician that has credible chops, credible connections, and as long as they were backed by the Beach Boys, Who else would you listen to at the time? Of course you're going to listen to Dennis Wilson and say, of course, let's bring him in. Let's talk to this Manson character, because who knows? Who knows? So it says here, Melcher is also known for his involvement with the cult leader Charles Manson. I'll skip that part because that's for next week. So he was on the staff of Columbia. Another Columbia reference. Whoa, Columbia Records, what is up? So nonetheless, this guy was very powerful with his production status, very powerful with the quote-unquote 1960s California sound. So Beach Boys, that Beach Boys sound, the Surfin' USA sound, is what his specialty was. And I'm glad I found this page. I'm glad I found this producer, because this is exactly going to coincide to next week's episode that I'm churning up. I'm churning it up for next week, because that's really what I'm psyched about also, is talking a little bit about the connections with Manson and his music and the Beach Boys, and then also getting way in depth with the next episode about how his I wouldn't say hatred towards the producers, but his drive turned into a negative, dark thing. His music drive and his dedication to his music essentially, in my opinion, flipped over to being a leader in a cult, and it got dark. It got dark for that guy and his followers, but we may understand why when it comes to what happens with his Beach Boys friends and all those people, and maybe being a hothead, maybe not being able to think before he acts, maybe not being able to filter his emotions into his actions. And that can definitely say a lot on why he did the things he did and what made him famous, instead of being a industry musician or being part of the California sound. In the wrong way, he became part of the California history and part of folklore and part of the era that really started serial killer popularity and stuff like that. And that's why I want to reiterate again that this has nothing to do with glorifying that kind of stuff. I got to repeat it, so I'm not getting any rudeness from people going, ugh, I can't believe that you're talking about this guy. Well, for this episode and the episodes that I follow up when it comes to this interesting stuff, he is merely a musician in this storyline, merely a connection to the Beach Boys. And that's what makes this so interesting. Okay, so this guy worked with a lot of bands. I want to see if there is a list of bands that he did work with, just to get an idea. Other than Beach Boys, this guy worked with the Byrds. Let's see, what else did he work? Who did he work with? The Byrds, Beach Boys. Let's see, some more. Pat Boone, Mamas and Papas. So yeah, this guy really was the California sound. Oh, and he was the only child of Doris Day. So he's definitely in the industry. His family was in the industry, whether it was movies, music, really just that early LA days, early OC days. This guy was right in the middle of it, Terry Melcher. So, moving on from this guy, that'll definitely lead into what I'm talking about after this. So, yes, so this guy had the connection that he had an encounter with the Manson family. And in 1968, and this is another connection with the Beach Boys, the Beach Amigos. In 1968, Beach Boy Dennis Wilson, the drummer, introduced Melcher to ex-con, an aspiring musician. So I didn't know this. doing my research, that he was already on the charts. He was already an ex-con. So that makes you think maybe Manson had a good poker face, possibly was good talker. Hell, he was a cult leader. He was a cult leader. So you can see why people would follow him at a young age, or people would trust him or believe him, especially with the era of the drugs that were out, the substances that would affect the mind very powerfully. And no one had the internet to do the research. Nobody had the vast libraries to research the things that he was saying. You didn't have the time to get on your iPhone. There was no iPhone to click on Google and say, LSD, is this safe? Who is this Manson character? Do you have a rap sheet? There wasn't any Facebook. There wasn't any stuff for that. So very interesting that Dennis Wilson may have been sweet-talked by Manson to get him into the industry, to get him into doing songwriting, to do productions with him. So he introduced Melcher to Manson. Manson and his family, which is with the cult family, had been living at Wilson's house on Sunset Boulevard after Wilson had picked up hitchhiking Manson family members, Patricia and Ella. Wilson expressed interest in Manson's music and also recorded 2 of Manson's songs with the Beach Boys. So there was 2. It wasn't just the one that was cited here, the one that ended up being Never Learn Not to Love. That is only one of the 2 that was cited. Now, if it's surfaced that there were 2 tracks that Manson recorded with Wilson and they ended up using as Beach Boys tracks, who knows really what the number was? Maybe there could have been a whole handful of Manson songs that ended up getting flipped as written by the Beach Boys, and we're jamming it on our way to the beach, or we're jamming it on our way to work. That's crazy. That's crazy. So that's something to dig up. I like that. I like that article. We'll have to keep that for the next episode. There's some juicy tidbits here because I don't want to give it away. I do not want to give it away. So here's another producer quote going to the LA Times article that I'm just flipping through, and this is the article that also had the Black Flag poster, the punk band Black Flag. And here is a quote that's popped up here and said from the producer and road manager Phil Kaufma. We'll look him up in a second after this quote. He quotes as saying, "We made a deal," Manson said, "put out my record, and you can have all my rights to the music. So I did," end quote. So maybe this explains some things, that he did just want to pass off his music to the Beach Boys, because maybe that's what got him off. Maybe what got him off is the fact that he could listen to his music as a Beach Boys title and just feel good about that. He felt that his art is art. He just wants to get it out there. His words are on the radio, or his words are in lyric on a record sheet or on a record or album somewhere. Very interesting that he said that. And you also never know, though, that maybe he was, maybe this Phil Kaufman guy was BSing. Because, just like I said with the Zeppelin thing, people are very touchy and feely with percentages and copyright and getting your song rights and all those little nitty-gritty things. You got to make sure you have all the T's crossed and the I's dotted. So let's flip around here with this article. Nonetheless, whether Manson was trying to do his music for real in the industry or not, within the music industry, especially with these punk acts and with a lot of metal and rock acts, he was a shock factor for future bands. He was a shock factor if you put him on a t-shirt, put him on a poster, especially all of his mug shots. He's looking weird. He's looking real weird. So whatever the past was, you got to say what happened when it came to everything after. He definitely was an influence on a lot of music industry stuff because you can still see it that people were taking his stuff. People were taking his... Wait, is that the guy's name? People were taking his music. People were using it, whether he actually said this stuff or not. Oh, I don't even see this guy on here. Let me look up... I'm going to go out to the search engine to find this Phil Kaufman. Okay. Kaufman. Look at this. Okay. What? Okay, so No, not Phil Kaufman. What? So maybe that was a typo. From the... Yeah, so... You know what? This might have been an actual typo name. His name was actually Phil Kaufman. Yeah, that's a... Sorry, that's a typo from LA Times. It must have gotten cut off on the quote area here. Phil Kaufman. Excuse me. And he was also a record producer and tour manager for, let's see, his notable acts were Joe Cocker, Rolling Stones, Frank Zappa. I think some people know these acts. So Manson definitely rubbed shoulders with a lot of big people, which makes you think, was it more than just that production studio time where he flipped a knife on somebody, or did people really know what he was thinking about? If they knew that he was going to go off the schizo and fly over that cuckoo nest, because this is nuts. There's a lot of producers and a lot of musicians that most likely knew Manson, and I'm sure were shocked when it came to the stuff that he ended up doing. Very relatable to his industry connections, very relatable to the fact that people were becoming distrustful. He's bringing out weapons at the studio. That's crazy. That's crazy stuff. So you wonder what went down in the studio, behind closed doors, partying, going to the homesteads or the compounds of the Manson family. You just never know what the Beach Boys, what Dennis Wilson saw, what these producers saw, especially when it came to songwrites and getting their songs out there. Like I said earlier, maybe Manson was one of those guys that just wanted to have his art out. He just wanted to have the music out. There wasn't an industry through YouTube or through television or through movies to get your music out back then. You had to work your way through the production, through the industry, directly out of these bigger bands, or else you weren't going to be heard. So maybe Manson just said to himself, I'm just going to do it so I can get my music out, whether it sells a dime or doesn't. I just want to make sure that those words get out, that those lyrics get out, that those melodies get out. So definitely the flower power style of thinking, where he just wanted to get that art out. He just wanted to push it out. He wanted to get it to somebody famous or get it to somebody credible and make sure that it was heard. So Phil Kaufman was the guy talking about how Manson pretty much wanted to just give the rights away to his songs just so it could be out on record. He just wanted to have a record out that had a song on it. So, as you can see here, 1, 2, maybe more of the Beach Boys songs were Manson, at least cited from these articles. I'm not gonna say it's true or not true. That's for you to decide. That's your opinion. You're watching. You're thinking. You're listening. So, think about it. That's the thinking of the week. That's the Are there more songs out there that were his? Are there other bands, especially associated with these producers? You saw the Byrds. That's a big band. When it came to The Last Gentleman, who was the producer, and also I think I saw, oh my goodness, I don't know who the last guy was, Melcher. Terry Melcher, I think, also was working with David Crosby, Stills, Nash. So big names. You never know if they passed off lyrics or passed off a melody idea to these bigger acts. And that's how it still works today. You're going to have these songwriters that either work for the label or sell their lyrics or sell their songwriting to certain artists or certain labels. And you never know if Manson was just trying to do that, where he was just saying, hey, as long as it gets on a record, as long as someone big can play it, I'm cool with that. So you never know what songs could have been a Manson song. And that's what's crazy to think about too, that there could be music that we're singing in the shower, that we're singing while we're on our skateboard or singing while we're biking around the park, that could have been written by a cult leader, that could have been written by a guy that made people brainwashed to go kill for him. It's really crazy. And you never know if all the music industry stuff led to a power trip, whether good or bad. Maybe there was some success with him passing off his music, and maybe that made him more cocky to do violent acts. Because it sounds like already, before he was working with the Beach Boys with Dennis Wilson, he was already a convict. He was already an ex-con out of jail. He was already showing violent tendencies, and I'm sure a lot of that might have portrayed in his art, might have been in and out of his music writing and his music sessions. So we may never know about who had a Manson song, who didn't have a Manson song, but there's a lot of big acts that are behind these producers that were either tour managers or that were studio producers that may or may not have taken a lot of ideas from Manson and may have passed it on, whether during the Manson family stuff or after the Tate murders. Excuse me. We don't know for sure, and that is interesting because the music industry is so big, and you do not know what big bands actually took his lyrics, took his melodies, took his chorus ideas. And I know if I was in the Stones or if I was in the Beach Boys, I would definitely squash ideas that someone that was behind such a huge, infamous, murderous cult wrote a couple of our hits. That would make your band totally off the charts. That would make the music industry blacklist you forever. You wouldn't be able to tour in certain areas. You would be looked at as these music stealers or these weirdos for taking his music. So there may be a lot of artists that will never know that took ideas from this guy, which I think is super crazy. So this guy, Terry Melcher, so we have two producers here that were notably around Manson, notably around huge acts with the 60s vibe, the California 60s sound, and it definitely makes you think about that era. It makes you think about what people were portraying in the songs. Yeah, beach time and surfing and California vibing and California girls and whoop-de-whoop-de-woo. Sometimes you gotta dig deep in the lyrics to really see what people were talking about and to see if they actually wrote that stuff. So, yeah, so Phil Kaufman actually produced a Manson album. He had an album. It says Kaufman produced and released, or at least according to Wikipedia. I'm gonna say it's just according to Wikipedia. I'm not gonna cite this as a real source, but it is on here. I am relating it to our topic today, and it says here that Kaufman produced and released Manson's album at the height of his notoriety, but found that he could not get anyone to stock Lie, the Love and Terror Cult. So I guess that's the title of his album that he cut. Oh, great. He's got his weird picture on there. So this was released in 1970, March 6th, and he was the producer. He was the sole producer, looks like, of this record. And the record label was called Awareness Records. So you wonder if there were things... Here we go, covers and sampling. So you never know if there were things that they couldn't release on here because it had already been taken by other bands, or he had let them use other songs that he was writing. So I'm not going to get too much into this because that's not really what I'm talking about here. But it's interesting that he did have a whole studio album, and Phil Kaufman was the producer. And interesting enough that he was the guy quoted as saying that Phil Kaufman was able to have all the rights. So whether this, I'm believing that this was his label, Awareness Records was his label. I'm gonna have my opinion in saying that that's what that was his record label, and that's what made Manson say, hey, I just want it out, you can have all the rights. So you wonder if Kaufman eventually passed off some songs or passed off some song rights to other bands, to bigger bands that he knew, that Kaufman was working with directly in the studios, on tour, what have you. Really crazy, crazy stuff. And so he was at Gold Star Studios for this record, and also an Unknown studio in Van Nuys. See if Gold Star's still around. Nope, closed in 1984. Mainly based on the fact that was starting to be the era of new technology allowing these bands to make their own recordings. Wow. And also a couple months after the studio was closed, a fire destroyed the building. And then a mini mall was later constructed on the site. So that's interesting too. There could have been some interesting energy, or it could have been an arsonist. Who knows? Or it could have been someone trying to collect some money. Who knows? But I think that's interesting how there were so many bands that came through there, including Manson. Gold Star Studios. And that was located in, Santa Monica Boulevard in Los Angeles. Very interesting about that. So another thing is the recording dates of the Manson album were in 67 and in 68. So this was released years and years after. That may be why Manson was quoted here saying to Kaufman he could put the record out and have all the rights to it as long as it gets out. So maybe that's what happened. Years later, he was involved in the cult. He was involved in all the murders, and then boom, they slap it out because of what he did. Maybe making some money based on the murders, which news do that every day. They make money off of violent things, off of a new dog shelter, off of a violent crime, off of a car accident, off of the weather, off of the traffic. It's all about the shock factor. It's all about what you want to know. It's all about the government, or it's all about this war going on. You just got to think about that. Interesting fact, one of the recording dates was September 11th, 1967. So going back with awkward dates, going back with awkward numbers, there was a September 11th studio date. So one of his 3 it sees here one of his 3 session eras. One of his dates was September 11th, 1967. So another little number game going on. Woo. So very interesting. Awareness label, producer Phil Kaufman. I do want to stop there before I keep diving into the Manson stuff and maybe giving away next week's stuff. So I'm going to stop there. I do want to get out real quick the fight card for this weekend's UFC event. We have Yoel Romero and Luke Rockhold. They're fighting down in Aussie, oi, oi, oi. And I do want to get up just the fight card. Can I just get the fight card? Please. Please. This is so crazy. Because they got a lot of Aussie dudes fighting. Mark Hunt's on the card. Oh, come on. I might have to go to... Apologies on not having it up earlier. I did want to touch on this. It's going to be a nice little card. Okay, let's see this. Okay, so we have Yoel, we have Luke as the main event. We have Mark Hunt and Curtis Blades as a co-main. That's going to be a great fight. Heavyweight guys. Mark Hunt, classic fighter. He's back to the old days. He goes back to the old days. Not sure how many fights he has left, but he's that brawler. He's stepping in, heavyweight guy, Australian brother. Definitely going to see some great punches, possibly a knockout. It's hard to think that him and Blades would go all rounds, but you never know. I've seen that before with heavyweights. And then, who else we have here? Oh, Tai Tavesa. That's another guy from Australia. He's a beast. He's a monster. So you have Yoel and Luke. That's going to be a good fight. Mark Hunt, Blades, Tuvesa, Asker. Don't know these cats. But we got another Australia guy. Another Australia matchup. And then I do know, we're going to flip through just everything a little bit. Damian Brown, Dun Young Kim. So these are prelims on FS1 if you got it. What is interesting is Ross Pearson is on he's on the early Fight Pass stuff. I love me some Pearson. That's crazy that he's off the FS1 prelim. So if you got the Fight Pass, check out some Pearson and Mizuto Hirota. That should be a beast. They're looking crazy on the pictures here. Some other guys that are going to be on the Fight Pass. So looking real good for this card. Per usual, with UFC going around the world international, they like to throw in the people that are local. Last week, the free card for their fight night was a lot of Brazilians. They were in Brazil. Machida is from Brazil, so they had, I believe, 12 Brazilians on that card total. So a lot of I like how when UFC does go international, they're bringing in the home crowd. They're bringing the home fighters, which I like. So with this card too, you're going to see a lot of New Zealanders, a lot of Australians. I know Romero is a fill-in. It was supposed to be Robert Whittaker, who's Aussie, and Rockhold, because Whittaker has the belt currently, so this will be for an interim. So there isn't a main event home guy, so that will be interesting to see who they're going to be cheering for. Whittaker's last fight was against Yoel, so you wonder if they're going to be cheering for Luke, or I'm not really sure what's going to go on. So that'll be an interesting thing. Obviously, for sure, with Hunt and Ty, they're definitely going to be shouting out for that. I was watching the pre-fight or the conference interviews last night with Blades, and someone did ask him about How does it feel to be an underdog? How does it feel to be the guy that's going to get booed for everything if he wins or if he does well with the rounds? I think that's an interesting factor when it comes to fighting, when it comes to not being liked in a certain area, whether it's music or whatever. I think that's interesting. So let's end it on that. If you're watching the fights, if you're just watching the tube, if you're doing whatever this weekend, enjoy it. Enjoy the weather, or you're inside, wherever you are, there's just one thing to do, and that's stay cool.